The dust clouds swirled around Maria's bare feet as she stumbled along the cracked asphalt road. Her cotton dress, once white with small blue flowers, now hung in dirty tatters around her thin frame. The Arizona sun blazed overhead like an angry furnace, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat waves and desperation. She had been walking for 3 days now. 3 days since she escaped from the nightmare that had become her life. 3 days since she gathered enough courage to run from the house where her stepfather's friends came and, when at all hours, where her mother lay unconscious most days from the pills and bottles scattered across their kitchen table. Maria's stomach cramped with hunger. The last real meal she remembered eating was over a week ago, a stale sandwich she found in the school cafeteria trash. At 15, she should have been worrying about homework and boys and weekend plans with friends. Instead, she worried about finding clean water and a safe place to sleep. The small town of Millerville appeared on the horizon like a desert oasis. She could see the water tower rising above a cluster of buildings, the American flag hanging limp in the still air above what looked like a general store. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. As she entered the town's main street, curious eyes followed her progress. An elderly woman sweeping her front porch stopped mid-stroke to stare. 2 men loading hay bales onto a truck paused their work to watch the dirty, exhausted girl walk past their feed store. Maria kept her eyes down, focusing only on putting one foot in front of the other. She had learned not to make eye contact with strangers. Eye contact led to questions, and questions led to people getting involved, and when people got involved, they usually sent her back to places she never wanted to see again. The general store's bell chimed as she pushed open the screen door. The air conditioning hit her like a blessing, raising goosebumps on her sunburned arms. Behind the counter, a plump woman with gray curls looked up from her newspaper crossword puzzle. "Can I help you, honey?" The woman's voice carried genuine concern, but Maria had heard that tone before from social workers and teachers and neighbors who thought they wanted to help. "Just looking," Maria whispered, though they both knew she had no money to buy anything. She wandered the narrow aisles, past shelves stocked with canned goods and household supplies. Her empty stomach growled loudly as she passed a display of fresh fruit. She paused by the bread section, inhaling the yeasty smell that reminded her of better times, back when her grandmother was still alive and their kitchen always smelled like baking. The woman behind the counter watched Maria with worried eyes. She had seen troubled kids before in her 30 years running this store. Most of them were local ranch hands, children acting out, or teenagers testing boundaries. But this girl was different. This girl looked like she was running from something terrible. "You hungry, sweetheart?" the woman called out softly. Maria's head snapped up, fear flashing across her dark eyes. She backed toward the door, ready to run again if necessary. "Wait," the woman said quickly, raising her hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not going to call anyone. I just thought you might want something to eat." For a moment, Maria hesitated. The kindness in the woman's voice reminded her painfully of her grandmother, who used to sneak her cookies before dinner and braid her hair while telling stories about the old country. "I don't have any money," Maria admitted quietly. "Didn't ask if you did." The woman came around the counter slowly, like she was approaching a frightened animal. "I'm Betsy. What's your name?" "Maria." The name slipped out before she could think to lie. "Well, Maria, I was just about to throw away some day-old sandwiches. Health department says we can't sell them after 24 hours. Seems wasteful to toss perfectly good food. You want to help me out by taking them off my hands?" Maria's pride warred with her hunger. Her grandmother had always taught her never to accept charity, to work for what she received. But her stomach cramped again, reminding her that pride wouldn't keep her alive on the road. "Okay," she whispered. Betty packed 2 turkey sandwiches, an apple, and a bottle of water into a brown paper bag. She also slipped in a small package of cookies when she thought Maria wasn't looking. "There's a park about 2 blocks down on Elm Street," Betty said as she handed over the bag. "Nice shade trees and a clean restroom. Good place to rest for a while." Maria clutched the bag against her chest like it contained treasure. "Thank you. You be careful out there, honey. And if you need anything else." Betty's voice trailed off. They both knew Maria wouldn't be back. The park was exactly where Betty said it would be. Ancient oak trees created pools of blessed shade across the grass. A small playground sat empty in the afternoon heat, swings moving slightly in the warm breeze. Maria found a bench partially hidden behind a cluster of bushes and sat down to eat her first real meal in days. The sandwich tasted better than anything she could remember. The turkey was tender, the bread soft, and there was even a slice of tomato that burst with flavor on her tongue. She ate slowly, making it last as long as possible, knowing she didn't know where her next meal might come from. As the afternoon wore on, families began arriving at the park. Mothers pushed toddlers on swings, while fathers threw baseballs with their sons. The sounds of laughter and normal life surrounded Maria, but she felt like she was watching it all through glass, like it was a movie about someone else's existence. A little girl with pigtails ran past her bench, chasing a butterfly with a net that was too big for her small hands. She stumbled and fell, skinning her knee on the sidewalk. Without thinking, Maria jumped up to help. "Are you okay?" Maria knelt beside the crying child, gently examining the scraped knee. "It hurts," the girl sobbed. "I know, sweetie, but it's not too bad. See? Just a little scratch." Maria pulled a tissue from her pocket and gently dabbed at the small trickle of blood. "My grandmother used to tell me that when we get hurt, it means we're learning how to be brave." The little girl's tears slowed. "Really? Really? And look how brave you're being right now. Emma, where are you?" A woman's voice called from across the park, tinged with worry. "Mama's coming," the girl said, pointing toward a blonde woman hurrying across the grass. "Emma, I told you not to run off," the woman scolded as she reached them. Then she noticed Maria kneeling beside her daughter. "Oh, I'm sorry. Is everything all right?" "She just fell and scraped her knee a little," Maria explained, standing up and brushing dirt from her dress. "She's very brave." The woman looked at Maria more closely, taking in the dirty clothes, the tangled hair, the exhaustion written across her young face. "Are you all right, dear? You look like you could use some help." The familiar panic rose in Maria's chest. She stepped backward, shaking her head. "I'm fine. I have to go." "Wait, Dash," the woman started, but Maria was already walking away quickly, her heart pounding. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maria realized she needed to find somewhere safe to spend the night. The park would be too exposed, too public. She had learned from previous nights on the road that abandoned buildings often housed dangerous people, and sleeping outside left her vulnerable to both the elements and anyone who might come across a young girl alone. She walked through the residential streets of Millerville, looking for possibilities. Most of the houses had lights on in their windows, families settling in for the evening. The sight filled her with a longing so sharp it took her breath away. At the edge of town, the houses grew larger and farther apart. Ranch properties stretched out into the desert, marked by weathered fence posts and gates. She could see cattle in some of the fields, dark shapes moving slowly across the grass in the gathering dusk. One property caught her attention. A large farmhouse sat about a quarter-mile back from the road, its windows glowing warmly in the twilight. But what interested Maria more was the barn she could see behind the house. Barns meant hay, and hay meant a soft place to sleep. They also usually had water for the animals. She studied the property carefully, watching for signs of dogs or security systems. The mailbox by the gate read J. Crawford in faded letters. The gate itself stood open, and she could see tire tracks leading up the dirt driveway. Taking a deep breath, Maria climbed through the fence and began walking toward the barn, staying in the shadows of the fence line. Her plan was simple: slip into the barn after dark, find a quiet corner in the hayloft, and leave before dawn. She had done it before in other places during her journey, and most farmers never knew she had been there. The barn was bigger than it had looked from the road. The main doors stood partially open, and she could hear the gentle sounds of animals settling in for the night. Horses nickered softly in their stalls, and she caught the earthy smell of hay and leather. She waited until full darkness fell before approaching the barn. The farmhouse windows still glowed with light, and she could see the silhouette of someone moving around inside, but the barn area appeared deserted. Maria slipped through the gap in the barn doors and found herself in a wide central aisle flanked by horse stalls. The animals turned their heads to look at her with curious, gentle eyes. At the far end of the barn, a ladder led up to a hayloft that looked perfect for her needs. She climbed the ladder carefully, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it. The loft was filled with sweet-smelling hay bales stacked nearly to the roof. She found a space between two stacks that was hidden from view, but still allowed her to see the ladder if anyone came up. Using her hands, she hollowed out a nest in the loose hay, creating a surprisingly comfortable bed. For the first time in 3 days, she felt relatively safe. The barn was warm and dry, and the sounds of the horses below were oddly comforting. She pulled the remaining cookies from Betty's bag and ate them slowly, savoring the sweetness. Then, she used her rolled-up jacket as a pillow and settled down to sleep, pulling loose hay over herself for warmth. But sleep wouldn't come easily. Every small sound made her tense, ready to run if discovered. The events of the past week played through her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Her stepfather's friends with their loud voices and wandering hands. Her mother's glassy-eyed indifference when Maria tried to tell her what was happening. The social worker who promised things would get better, but never came back to check. She must have finally dozed because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through gaps in the barn siding, and she could hear someone moving around below. Panic shot through her as she realized she had overslept. She had planned to be gone before dawn, but the sun was clearly well up in the sky. Carefully, she crept to the edge of the loft and peered down. A man was feeding the horses, moving from stall to stall with practiced efficiency. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors. His movements were calm and patient as he spoke quietly to each animal. Maria held her breath, hoping he would finish his chores and leave without looking up. But as she shifted position to get a better view, her foot knocked against a bucket that had been left in the loft. It clattered loudly as it rolled across the wooden floor. The man's head snapped up, and his eyes found her immediately. For a long moment, they stared at each other in silence. Maria's muscles tensed, ready to run, but there was nowhere to go except down the ladder, right past him. "Well," the man said finally, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Looks like I've got a visitor in my hayloft." Maria pressed herself against the back wall, trying to become invisible. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "You don't need to be afraid," he continued, setting down the bucket of grain he had been carrying. "I'm not going to hurt you or call anyone. But you look like you could use some help." When she still didn't respond, he sighed and returned to feeding his horses. "My name's Jack Crawford. This is my ranch. You're welcome to stay up there as long as you need to, but I'm guessing you're hungry. I was about to make breakfast for myself. Seems like a waste to cook for just one person." Maria remained frozen in place, unable to decide whether to run or trust this stranger. "I'm going to head to the house now," Jack said, finishing with the last horse. "If you change your mind about that breakfast, the kitchen door's the one with the yellow flowers painted on it. I'll leave it unlocked." He walked toward the barn entrance, then paused and looked back up toward the loft. "And miss, whatever you're running from, you don't have to keep running. Sometimes the best thing to do is stop and figure out a better plan." Then he was gone, leaving Maria alone with her racing thoughts and the gentle sounds of the horses below. Through the gaps in the barn siding, she could see him walking toward the farmhouse, his hands in his pockets, moving with the unhurried pace of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be. The smell of bacon began drifting from the house about 20 minutes later, followed by the aroma of fresh coffee and something that might have been pancakes. Maria's stomach growled traitorously, reminding her that one sandwich and some cookies were hardly enough to sustain someone who had been walking for days. She stayed in the loft for another hour, watching the house through the barn window. She saw Jack move past the kitchen window several times, and she could see steam rising from what looked like a full breakfast spread laid out on his table. Finally, hunger won over caution. She climbed down from the loft slowly, listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate a trap. But the barn remained peaceful, the horses content in their stalls. The walk to the house felt like it took forever. The yellow-flowered door stood slightly ajar, just as Jack had promised. She could hear him humming inside, the sound mixing with the sizzle of something cooking on the stove. Maria raised her hand to knock, then stopped. What if this was a mistake? What if he was calling the police right now? What if he was like the men who came to her mother's house, pretending to be kind before revealing their true intentions? But her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in her memory. Sometimes, Mija, you have to have faith that there are still good people in the world. She knocked softly on the doorframe. Come on in, Jack called from inside. Door opened. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with yellow curtains at the windows and the lingering aroma of home-cooked food. Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the same patient care he had shown with his horses. Perfect timing, he said without turning around. Just finished the last batch. Hope you like blueberry pancakes. The table was set for two, with plates and silverware arranged carefully on a checkered tablecloth. A pitcher of orange juice sat beside a bowl of fresh fruit, and the bacon was already plated and waiting. Sit wherever you'd like, Jack said, finally turning to look at her. His eyes were kind but serious, and Maria could see him taking in her appearance. The dirty clothes, the tangled hair, the exhaustion written in every line of her body. She chose the chair closest to the door, her muscles still tense and ready to run if necessary. Jack brought the pancakes to the table and sat down across from her. I always make too much food, he said conversationally, as if having a runaway teenager as breakfast table was the most natural thing in the world. Living alone, you'd think I'd learn to cook smaller portions, but old habits die hard. He served pancakes on both plates, then pushed the syrup and butter toward Maria. My late wife used to say I cooked like I was still feeding ranch hands. She tried for 20 years to break me of the habit. Maria cut a small piece of pancake and took a careful bite. It was fluffy and sweet, with bursts of tart blueberry that made her mouth water for more. But she ate slowly, afraid that showing too much enthusiasm might somehow give away how desperate she really was. These are really good, she said quietly. Thank you. My wife's recipe. Jack ate his own breakfast calmly, not asking the questions that Maria could see forming behind his eyes. She always said food tastes better when you're sharing it with someone. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of silverware against plates and the distant lowing of cattle in the fields. Through the kitchen window, Maria could see the vast expanse of Jack's ranch stretching toward the mountains on the horizon. How long since you've had a real meal? Jack asked finally, his voice gentle. Maria considered lying, but something about his quiet manner made her want to tell the truth. A while. And how long have you been on the road? 3 days. The words came out in a whisper. Jack nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Long way to travel on foot. You heading somewhere specific, or just away from somewhere? The question hung in the air between them. Maria stared down at her plate, afraid to meet his eyes. She had learned that adults always wanted to know where she came from, and that information always led to phone calls and officials and being sent back to places that weren't safe. Away from somewhere, she admitted. I figured as much. Jack pushed back from the table and refilled both their orange juice glasses. Thing is, running away only works if you're running towards something better. Otherwise, you're just walking in circles, getting more tired and hungry with every step. You don't understand, Maria said, her voice barely audible. Maybe not, Jack agreed. But I understand what it's like to feel like you don't have any good choices. Lost my parents when I was about your age. Ended up in some places that weren't too pleasant before I figured out how to make a life for myself. He sat back down and looked directly at her, his brown eyes serious but not unkind. What I learned is that sometimes you have to stop running long enough to catch your breath and make a real plan. Otherwise, you just end up in the same kind of trouble you were trying to escape from. Maria felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. It made her weak, and weak people didn't survive on the streets. I can't go back, she said firmly. Didn't say you had to. Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her face. But you can't keep walking forever either. You need time to get stronger to figure out your next move. And you need somewhere safe to do that thinking. Are you saying I can stay here? The question slipped out before she could stop it. I'm saying that if you want to stay for a while, you can. I've got more space than I know what to do with, and this ranch doesn't run itself. Could use someone who's not afraid of hard work. Maria stared at him in disbelief. You don't even know me. How do you know I'm not dangerous? How do you know I won't steal from you or cause trouble? Jack smiled for the first time since she had met him, and the expression transformed his weathered face. Because dangerous people don't usually rescue little girls who fall down in parks. Betty at the general store mentioned you helped her daughter Emma yesterday. Maria's mouth fell open. You know Betty? Small town, Jack explained. Betty's my late wife's cousin. When she told me about a young girl who looked like she was in trouble, I had a feeling you might end up somewhere on my property eventually. This ranch sits on the main road leading out of town. A lot of folks passing through stop here when they need a place to rest. So you were expecting me? Hoping you'd be smart enough to find somewhere safe to sleep anyway. Jack stood up and began clearing the breakfast dishes. Look, I'm not going to pretend I know what you're running from. And I'm not going to push you to talk about it before you're ready. But I'm going to offer you a deal. Maria waited, her heart hammering with a mixture of hope and fear. You can stay here as long as you need to, on one condition. You work for your keep. I've got horses to care for, fences that need mending, and about a dozen other jobs that I'm getting too old to handle on my own. In exchange, you get a safe place to sleep, 3 meals a day, and time to figure out what you want to do with your life. What if someone comes looking for me? Jack's expression grew serious. Depends on who's looking and why. But I'll tell you this much. Nobody's going to hurt you while you're on my property. I give you my word on that. Maria felt something inside her chest begin to unknot for the first time in months. The offer seemed too good to be true, but the sincerity in Jack's voice convinced her that he meant what he said. Okay, she said softly. I'll stay. For a while. Good. Jack smiled again. Now, first thing we need to do is get you cleaned up and find you some clothes that aren't held together with hope and stubbornness. Then I'll show you around the ranch, and we can talk about what needs doing. As Maria followed Jack through his house, toward what he explained was a guest room with its own bathroom, she felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through her body. It took her a moment to identify it, because it had been absent from her life for so long. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a single bed covered in a handmade quilt and a dresser topped with a small mirror. The attached bathroom had a shower with good water pressure and towels that smelled like lavender. Take as long as you need, Jack told her, setting a stack of clothes on the bed. These belonged to my late wife when she was younger. They might be a little big, but they're clean and whole. When you're ready, come find me in the barn and we'll start your education in ranch work. After he left, Maria locked the bathroom door and turned on the shower. The hot water felt like a miracle against her skin, washing away days of dirt and fear. She stayed under the spray until the water began to run cold, reluctant to leave this small sanctuary. The clothes Jack had left fit reasonably well, jeans that were a little long, and a cotton shirt that was loose but comfortable. There were also clean underwear and socks, and a pair of boots that were only slightly too big. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw someone she barely recognized. Clean and dressed in proper clothes, she looked less like a desperate runaway and more like a regular teenager who might be visiting relatives on a ranch. She found Jack in the barn, mucking out horse stalls with methodical efficiency. He looked up when she entered, and she saw approval in his eyes. "Much better," he said. "Feel better too, I bet." "Yes, sir. Thank you. Just Jack is fine." Now, first lesson in ranch work. Horses need fresh water, clean stalls, and regular feeding. They also need attention and kindness. A horse that trusts you will work harder and live longer than one that fears you. He handed her pitchfork. "Think you can handle cleaning out the stall at the end?" Old Moses is gentle as a lamb, but he makes a mess like you wouldn't believe. For the rest of the morning, Jack taught Maria the basics of horse care. He showed her how to approach the animals calmly, how to check their hooves for stones, and how to brush their coats until they gleamed. The work was physical and demanding, but Maria found herself enjoying the simple rhythms of it. "You're a natural," Jack commented as she successfully led a mare named Buttercup from her stall to the pasture. "Most people are afraid of animals this size, but you handle them like you've been doing it for years." "My grandmother had chickens," Maria explained. "She always said animals know if you're afraid of them, so you might as well be brave." "Smart woman, your grandmother." They worked together through the afternoon, Jack patiently explaining each task and Maria absorbing every detail. By evening, she was tired but satisfied in a way she hadn't felt in years. Physical exhaustion from honest work was completely different from the bone-deep weariness of fear and uncertainty. That night, Jack made dinner, beef stew with fresh bread, and they ate together as the sun set over the desert. The conversation was easier now, flowing naturally between ranch work and small observations about the horses and the weather. "Jack," Maria said as they finished eating. "Yes. Thank you for letting me stay, for not asking questions I'm not ready to answer." Jack nodded slowly. "We all deserve a chance to start over when we need one. The past is important, but it doesn't have to define everything that comes after." That night, Maria slept in a real bed for the first time in longer than she could remember. The room was quiet except for the distant sounds of the horses settling in for the night and the desert wind whispering through the cottonwood trees around the house. For the first time since her grandmother had died 2 years ago, Maria dared to hope that maybe her story wasn't over yet. Maybe there were still chapters left to be written, chapters that didn't involve fear or hunger or the constant need to run. As she drifted off to sleep, her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in her memory. "Every ending is also a beginning, Mija. You just have to be brave enough to turn the page." 3 weeks had passed since Maria first collapsed in Jack Crawford's hayloft, and she was beginning to understand what it meant to have a routine again. Each morning, she woke with the sunrise to help Jack feed and water the horses. After breakfast, they worked together on various ranch tasks, mending fences, checking on the cattle, maintaining equipment. Afternoons were often spent in a large vegetable garden that Jack's late wife had planted years ago, which had grown wild in her absence. Maria found herself looking forward to these daily rhythms. There was something deeply satisfying about the physical work, about seeing immediate results from her efforts. When she repaired a section of fence, it stayed fixed. When she weeded a row of tomatoes, they grew stronger and healthier. After months of feeling powerless, it was healing to be able to make things better instead of just surviving them. Jack proved to be a patient teacher and a surprisingly good cook. He never pressed her for details about her past, but he shared stories about his own life. Growing up on this same ranch, meeting his wife Sarah at a county fair, building their life together over 35 years of marriage. His stories painted pictures of a kind of life Maria had only seen in movies, where people stayed in one place long enough to build something lasting. Sarah always said this place needed young voices. Jack told her one evening as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. She wanted children of our own, but it never happened for us. She used to joke that maybe the ranch was waiting for the right young person to come along and bring it back to life. Maria absorbed these stories like a person who had been wandering in the desert absorbing water. They gave her a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her grandmother's death, a feeling that maybe she could be part of something bigger than just her own survival. But on this particular morning, that sense of security was about to be tested. Maria was in the barn, brushing down Buttercup and talking softly to the gentle mare when she heard the sound of car engines coming up the driveway. Her body went rigid with instinctive fear. In her experience, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. She crept to the barn window and peered out carefully. Two vehicles were pulling up to the house, a sheriff's department cruiser and a sedan that looked official. Her heart began hammering against her ribs as she watched three people get out. A uniformed deputy, a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase, and a man she didn't recognize but who moved with the confident authority of someone used to being in charge. "Jack Crawford," the woman called out as Jack emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "That's me. What can I do for you folks?" "I'm Sandra Mitchell from Child Protective Services. This is Deputy Rodriguez and Detective Grant from the County Sheriff's Office. We're looking for a missing juvenile, Maria Santos, age 15. We have reason to believe she may be in this area." Maria's breath caught in her throat. They had found her. Somehow, despite all her careful efforts to stay hidden, they had tracked her down. She pressed herself against the barn wall, mind racing through possible escape routes. "Missing how long?" Jack asked, his voice calm but carefully neutral. 3 weeks now," Detective Grant answered. "She ran away from her placement home in Phoenix. Her family is very worried about her." Even from her hiding spot, Maria could hear the lie in those words. Her stepfather and mother weren't worried about her. They were probably angry that she had escaped before they could collect more money from the state for keeping her. "Phoenix is a long way from here," Jack observed. "What makes you think she'd be in Millerville?" "We've been following reports of a teenage girl traveling on foot through several towns along this highway," the CPS worker explained. "The description matches, and this is one of the last places with resources before you hit open desert." Maria watched through the window as Jack nodded thoughtfully. His expression gave nothing away, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Well, I haven't seen any teenage girls around here except for Emma, and she belongs to Betty in town." Jack's voice remained steady. "But you're welcome to look around if you need to. We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Crawford," Detective Grant said. "Mind if we check your outbuildings? Sometimes runaways hide in barns or sheds." Maria's heart stopped. They were going to search the barn. She would be discovered, dragged back to Phoenix, back to the house where men came and went at all hours, and her mother couldn't stay sober long enough to notice what was happening to her own daughter. But then Jack did something unexpected. "Of course," he said readily. "Though I should mention, I keep my horses in the barn, and they're not too fond of strangers. Buttercup in particular gets agitated around new people. You might want to be careful." As the group began walking toward the barn, Jack called out loudly, "Let me just go calm the horses first. They've been skittish lately. Had a coyote prowling around last night." This was clearly a warning meant for Maria. Jack was giving her time to hide more effectively or escape. But where could she go? The loft would be the first place they looked, and she couldn't make it to the house without being seen. Then she remembered something Jack had shown her during her first week, a small storage room at the very back of the barn where they kept spare tack and equipment. It was partially hidden behind a stack of hay bales and had a door that looked like just another wall panel unless you knew where to look. Moving as quietly as possible, Maria slipped out of Buttercup's stall and made her way to the back of the barn. She could hear Jack's voice getting closer as he entered the building with the officials. "Easy now, Buttercup," Jack was saying in a deliberately loud voice. "These folks just want to have a look around. Nothing to get excited about." Maria found the hidden door and slipped inside just as she heard footsteps entering the main part of the barn. The storage room was small and stuffy, filled with saddles and bridles hanging from hooks. A narrow window near the ceiling provided the only light. "Impressive operation you have here," Detective Grant's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "Been in my family for 3 generations," Jack replied. My grandfather started with just a few head of cattle and a dream. Maria could hear them moving through the barn, checking each stall. Her hands shook as she tried to control her breathing, terrified that any small sound might give her away. "What's up there?" That was the CPS worker's voice. "Hayloft." Ladder's a bit rickety, but you're welcome to take a look. The sound of someone climbing the wooden ladder made Maria's pulse race. They were being thorough, checking every possible hiding spot. "Nothing up here except hay and a few old buckets," Deputy Rodriguez called down. "What about back there?" Detective Grant asked. "Looks like there's more space behind those hay bales." Maria held her breath as footsteps approached her hiding place. Through a gap between the wall boards, she could see movement in the main barn area. "Just storage," Jack said casually. "Haven't been back there in months. It's mostly old equipment and saddles that need repair. Mind if we take a look anyway?" For a moment, there was silence. Then Jack said, "Not at all, though you'll want to watch for mice. Sarah always said they made nests back there." Maria heard the hay bales being moved aside. Any second now, they would find a storage room door and discover her cowering inside like a trapped animal. But then Buttercup let out a loud whinny from her stall, followed by the sound of hooves stomping nervously. "Better check on her," Jack said quickly. "She gets anxious when there are too many strangers around." The footsteps moved away from Maria's hiding place toward the front of the barn. She could hear Jack speaking soothingly to the horse, and gradually the animal seemed to calm down. "Is there anywhere else she might be hiding?" the CPS worker asked. "Can't think of anywhere," Jack replied honestly. "Like I said, I haven't seen any teenage girls around here. But if I do, I'll be sure to call the sheriff's office right away." "Here's my card," Detective Grant said. "Call if you see anything or if she shows up looking for help. Kids on the road often approach ranch houses looking for food or shelter. I'll keep that in mind." Maria remained frozen in the storage room until she heard the car engine starting up and driving away. Even then, she waited several more minutes before carefully opening the door and peering out. "They're gone," Jack's voice said softly. "You can come out now." She emerged from her hiding place on shaky legs, her face pale and her hands trembling. Jack was leaning against Buttercup's stall, his expression serious but not unkind. "So," he said quietly, "Maria Santos from Phoenix, age 15, ran away from a placement home 3 weeks ago." Maria couldn't meet his eyes. "Are you going to call them back?" "That depends. Were you in danger where you came from?" The simple directness of the question caught her off guard. Adults usually ask complicated questions about feelings and situations and circumstances. But Jack just wanted to know the basic truth. "Yes," she whispered. "Physical danger?" "Sexual danger." Maria nodded, tears starting to fall despite her efforts to hold them back. Jack was quiet for a long moment, stroking Buttercup's neck thoughtfully. Then, "I guess the question is, what do we do now?" "I don't know." The words came out as a sob. "I can't go back there. I won't go back. Didn't say you had to. But running forever isn't a solution either. You need legal status, proper documentation, a way to finish your education. Otherwise, you'll spend your whole life looking over your shoulder. You don't understand. They'll send me back to my mother's house." The social worker said it was the only placement available. "But my stepfather," Maria's voice broke. "What about your stepfather?" "He lets his friends come over. They pay him money to spend time with me. And my mother takes pills and pretends she doesn't see what's happening." Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "How long has this been going on?" "Since my grandmother died 2 years ago. That's when I had to move in with them." Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I try to tell people. I told teachers, I told the social worker. But my stepfather said I was lying, and my mother backed him up. Nobody believed me." "I believe you," Jack said simply. Those 3 words hit Maria like a physical force. She had been carrying the weight of disbelief for so long that hearing someone say they trusted her truth felt like a heavy burden being lifted from her shoulders. "But what can we do about it?" she asked. "I'm a minor. I don't have any rights. They'll just drag me back. Maybe, or maybe there's another way." Jack pushed himself away from the stall and looked at her directly. I know a lawyer in town. Good woman, been practicing family law for 20 years. She might have some ideas about how to handle this situation legally. What if she just calls child services too? She won't. Attorney-client privilege means she has to keep what you tell her confidential unless you're in immediate danger. And right now you're safe here. Maria felt a small spark of hope, but it was mixed with fear. What if they come back with a search warrant or something? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But for now, they don't have any evidence you're here. They were fishing, following up on reported sightings. As long as you're careful about staying out of sight when strangers are around, we should be okay. That afternoon, Jack made a phone call to Amanda Reeves, the family law attorney he had mentioned. Maria could only hear his side of the conversation, but it sounded promising. She'll see us tomorrow morning, Jack told her after hanging up. She's handled cases like yours before, and she thinks there might be some options we haven't considered. Like what? Emancipation, for one thing. If we can prove you're capable of supporting yourself and that it's in your best interest to live independently, the court might grant you legal adult status, even though you're only 15. But I don't have a job or any money. No, but you have skills and a place to live and someone willing to employ you. This ranch is a legitimate business, and you've been doing real work here. Amanda said that could be the foundation for an emancipation petition. That evening, Jack helped Maria prepare for the meeting with the lawyer. They went through everything that had happened to her, writing down dates and details that might be important for building a legal case. This is hard to talk about, Jack said gently as Maria struggled to describe the worst incidents at her stepfather's house. But Amanda needs to understand exactly what you were running from. The more specific you can be, the better chance we have of convincing a judge that you are in real danger. What if the judge doesn't believe me either? What if they think I'm just making things up to avoid going home? Then we'll figure out another way. But, Maria, you've got to understand something. You're not the same scared girl who showed up here 3 weeks ago. You've proven you can work hard, take responsibility, and contribute to something larger than yourself. That matters in court. The next morning, they drove to Amanda Reeves' office in a larger town about an hour away from Millerville. Maria was nervous about leaving the ranch, worried that they might encounter the police officers who had been searching for her, but the trip was uneventful. Amanda Reeves turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Her office was filled with family photos and legal books, creating an atmosphere that was both professional and warm. "Tell me your story," she said simply after Jack had made the introductions. For the next hour, Maria recounted everything: her grandmother's death, the move to her mother's house, the escalating abuse from her stepfather and his friends, the failed attempts to get help from authorities, and, finally, her decision to run away. Amanda listened without interruption, taking notes occasionally, but mostly just paying attention with the focused intensity of someone who had heard too many similar stories. "How old were you when the sexual abuse started?" Amanda asked. 13, right after I moved in with them. "And you reported this to your caseworker?" "Multiple times. But my stepfather always convinced them that I was lying because I didn't want to live there. He said I was trying to manipulate the system to get placed somewhere else." Amanda nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, that's a common response. The system is supposed to protect children, but it's overwhelmed and underfunded. Sometimes kids slip through the cracks. So what can we do?" Jack asked. "Several options. Emancipation is one possibility, but it's a high bar to meet. We need to prove that Maria is financially self-sufficient and that emancipation serves her best interests. The fact that she has stable employment and housing helps, but courts are reluctant to emancipate minors unless there's no other choice." "What are the other choices?" "We could pursue a dependency case, asking the court to remove Maria from her mother's custody and place her in a more appropriate environment. Given Jack's willingness to provide housing and employment, he could potentially become a licensed foster parent." "How long would that take?" Maria asked. "Several months, minimum. And there's no guarantee the court would approve the placement. They want extensive background checks, home studies, and they probably want to interview your mother and stepfather as part of the process." which means they'd know exactly where I am. Yes, and they'd have the right to contest the placement and demand your return pending the court's decision. Maria felt her hope beginning to fade. Every legal option seemed to involve risks that could send her right back to the danger she had escaped. But Amanda wasn't finished. There is one more possibility we should discuss. It's more complicated and would require some careful planning, but it might be our best option. What is it? Jack asked. We file for a protective order based on the abuse allegations and simultaneously petition for emergency foster placement with Jack as the proposed guardian. If we can demonstrate immediate danger and show that Maria has been functioning successfully in Jack's care, we might be able to get temporary legal status while the longer-term issues are resolved. Would that work? It's our best shot. The key is building a strong case that documents both the abuse and Maria's current stability. We'll need medical records if there are any, school records showing the impact of the abuse, and evidence of Maria's successful integration into Jack's household. What kind of evidence? Maria asked. Work records, evidence of her contributions to the ranch, character references from community members, documentation of her emotional and physical health improvements. Basically, we need to show that removal from the abusive situation and placement in a stable environment has been dramatically beneficial. Jack was nodding slowly. Betty at the general store could provide a character reference. So could Dr. Patterson, who runs the veterinary clinic. He's been out to the ranch a few times and has seen Maria working with the horses. That's exactly the kind of thing we need. Amanda made more notes. The challenge is going to be timing. Once we file these petitions, the clock starts ticking. Child Services will have to respond, and they'll probably want to remove Maria from Jack's care, pending a full investigation. Remove her to where? Jack asked. Temporary foster placement, most likely, or potentially back to her mother's custody if they can't find an immediate alternative. No, Maria said firmly. I won't go back there. I'll run again first. Amanda looked at her seriously. Maria, I understand your fear, but running again would hurt our case significantly. If you want legal protection, you need to trust the system to work, even though it failed you before. How is that fair? I finally found somewhere safe, and now I have to risk losing it just to try to make it legal. I know it's not fair. Very little about your situation has been fair. But the alternative is living in hiding for the rest of your minority, always looking over your shoulder, never able to build a real life. That night, Maria and Jack sat on the front porch talking through their options. The decision felt impossible. Risk the safety she had found for the possibility of legal protection, or maintain status quo, and hope they could stay hidden for the next 3 years. What do you think I should do? Maria asked. Jack was quiet for a long time, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. I think you should do what your grandmother would have advised you to do. Maria thought about her grandmother's voice, her constant encouragement to be brave, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. She would have told me to fight, Maria said finally. She always said running away from problems just meant they followed you wherever you went. Then we fight. We file the petitions. We build the strongest case we can. And we trust that there are still judges out there who care more about protecting children than following bureaucratic procedures. What if we lose? Then we deal with whatever happens next. But, Maria, you've already survived the worst things that could happen to you. You found your way here, you've proven you can take care of yourself, and you've got people who believe in you now. That's not nothing. The next morning, they called Amanda and told her to proceed with the legal filings. The die was cast. Within a few days, Maria's case would be officially in the system, and her fate would be in the hands of judges and social workers and lawyers. But that afternoon, as she worked alongside Jack repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The conviction that she was fighting for something worth having, rather than just running from something she feared. Jack, she said as they loaded the damaged fence posts into the truck. Yeah, thank you for believing in me, for fighting for me. Jack paused in his work and looked at her directly. Everyone deserves someone who will fight for them, Maria. The fact that you had to wait this long to find that doesn't mean you didn't always deserve it. As they drove back to the ranch house, Maria watched the familiar landscape rolling past the truck windows. 3 weeks ago, this had been foreign territory, a place to hide temporarily before moving on. Now it felt like home in a way she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death. Whatever happened in the coming weeks, whatever the courts decided about her future, she would always carry this time with her. The knowledge that there were still people in the world who would open their homes to a stranger, who would risk their own safety to protect someone in need. Her grandmother had been right about one thing. There were still good people in the world. Sometimes you just had to be brave enough to let them help you. The legal process would be complicated and uncertain, but Maria was no longer facing it alone. She had Jack's support, Amanda's expertise, and her own hard-earned strength to sustain her through whatever came next. For the first time since her ordeal began, she was fighting back instead of just surviving, and that, she realized, made all the difference in the world. The courthouse in Flagstaff looked more imposing than Maria had imagined. Built from red sandstone with tall windows and carved details, it seemed designed to make people feel small and insignificant as they approached its heavy wooden doors. Maria walked between Jack and Amanda Reeves, her hands trembling slightly despite her efforts to appear calm. "Remember what we practiced," Amanda said quietly as they climbed the stone steps. "Answer only the questions you're asked. Be specific about facts, but don't elaborate unless the judge requests more detail. And if you need a break at any point, just say so." 6 weeks had passed since they filed the emergency petitions. 6 weeks of preparation, documentation gathering, and waiting for a court date that would determine Maria's future. During that time, the ranch had felt increasingly like borrowed time, a sanctuary that might disappear at any moment. The legal process had moved faster than Amanda expected, partly because Maria's case had been flagged as high priority due to the abuse allegations. But that speed came with complications. Child Services had launched their own investigation, which meant social workers making unexpected visits to the ranch, conducting interviews with both Maria and Jack, and examining every aspect of their living arrangement with microscopic attention. "This is highly irregular," the CPS supervisor, Mrs. Richardson, had told Amanda during one of their preliminary conferences. "We have protocols for handling runaway minors. They don't include allowing them to remain with unlicensed caregivers while we sort out their legal status. The irregularity of the situation reflects the failure of your agency to protect this child in the first place." Amanda had responded calmly. "My client ran away because your system put her in danger and ignored her requests for help." Now, as they entered the courthouse lobby, Maria could see Mrs. Richardson waiting near the elevators with another social worker Maria didn't recognize. Their presence made her stomach clench with anxiety. "They look angry," Maria whispered to Jack. "They're frustrated because our case makes them look bad," Jack replied quietly. "That doesn't mean we're wrong. It means they wish the situation had never come to light." The hearing was scheduled in Family Court Division 3, presided over by Judge Patricia Hernandez. Amanda had explained that Judge Hernandez had a reputation for being thorough and fair, but also for asking difficult questions and expecting honest answers. "She doesn't tolerate any nonsense from either side," Amanda had warned them. "She's seen every kind of family crisis you can imagine, and she's good at spotting lies or manipulation. That works in our favor, as long as we stick to the truth." The courtroom itself was smaller than the ones Maria had seen on television, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in a slightly greenish glow. Judge Hernandez was already at the bench when they entered, reviewing a thick file that Maria realized must contain her entire life history. "Please be seated," the judge said without looking up. "We're here today for the matter of Santos versus Arizona Department of Child Safety. Case number JD 2025-0847. Counsel, please state your appearances for the record." Amanda stood first. "Amanda Reeves, representing the minor child. Maria Santos, Your Honor." David Morrison, representing the Arizona Department of Child Safety. said a man in a gray suit whom Maria hadn't noticed before. "Thank you. Ms. Reeves, this is your petition, so we'll begin with your case." Amanda walked to the podium position between the counsel tables. "Your Honor, we're asking this court to grant emergency protective custody of Maria Santos and to place her in the care of Mr. Jack Crawford, where she has been safely residing for the past 2 months. I've reviewed the allegations in your filing, Ms. Reeves. They're quite serious. Do you have evidence to support these claims beyond your client's testimony?" "We do, Your Honor." Amanda opened her briefcase and pulled out several folders. "We have medical records documenting injuries consistent with physical and sexual abuse, school records showing declining academic performance, and increased absences coinciding with the alleged abuse period, and statements from mandatory reporters who attempted to investigate the situation but were stonewalled by the family." Judge Hernandez accepted the documents and began reviewing them. The courtroom was silent except for the soft rustling of papers. "Mr. Morrison, has your department investigated these allegations?" The CPS attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The original reports were investigated in 2023 and 2024. Our caseworkers found insufficient evidence to substantiate the allegations. The family cooperated fully with our investigation, and the minor was observed to be adequately cared for." "Adequately cared for," Amanda repeated, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Your Honor, adequately cared for does not mean safe. The records will show that Maria's caseworker made exactly 3 home visits over an 18-month period, all of which were scheduled in advance." "Your Honor," Mr. Morrison interjected, "the minor has a documented history of behavioral issues and false allegations. Her teachers reported that she was frequently disruptive and made attention-seeking claims that could not be verified." Maria felt her face flush with anger. Even now, even in a courtroom where she was supposed to be protected, they were calling her a liar. Judge Hernandez looked up from the documents. "I'd like to hear from the minor herself. Ms. Santos, please approach the witness stand." This was the moment Maria had been dreading for weeks. She stood on shaky legs and walked to the small box beside the judge's bench. The court clerk administered the oath, asking her to swear to tell the truth, and Maria's voice came out as barely more than a whisper as she promised to do so. "Ms. Santos," Judge Hernandez said gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me, in your own words, what happened in your mother's home." Maria took a deep breath and began speaking. She told the judge about her grandmother's death and being forced to move in with her mother and stepfather. She described the first time her stepfather's friends had paid attention to her in ways that made her uncomfortable and how that attention escalated over time. "I tried to tell my mom," Maria said, her voice growing steadier as she continued, "but she was taking pills that made her sleepy all the time. When I told her what was happening, she said I was imagining things." "What about school? Did you tell anyone there?" "I told Mrs. Patterson, my English teacher. She said she had to report it, and a social worker came to our house. But my stepfather told them I was lying because I didn't want to live there, and they believed him." "Why do you think they believe him instead of you?" Maria considered the question carefully. "Because adults don't like to believe that other adults would hurt kids. It's easier to think that kids make things up." Judge Hernandez nodded slowly. "Tell me about your decision to leave." "One night, my stepfather brought 3 men to the house. They paid him money, and he told me to go with them to the back bedroom. I knew what they wanted, and I knew my mom wasn't going to stop it. So I waited until everyone was asleep, and I left." "Where did you go?" "I walked. I didn't have anywhere specific to go. I just knew I couldn't stay there anymore." "How did you end up at Mr. Crawford's ranch?" For the first time since taking the stand, Maria smiled slightly. "I was exhausted and hungry, and I saw his barn from the road. I thought I could sleep in a hayloft for one night and then keep going. But Mr. Crawford found me and offered me breakfast." "What has your life been like at the ranch?" "It's the first time I've felt safe in years. Mr. Crawford treats me with respect. He's taught me how to take care of horses and work the land. I have my own room, regular meals, and Nobody hurts me or makes me do things I don't want to do. Do you want to continue living there? More than anything, it feels like home. Judge Hernandez made several notes before looking up again. Mr. Morrison, does your department have any questions for Ms. Santos? The CPS attorney approached the podium. Ms. Santos, isn't it true that you've had behavioral problems at school for several years? Maria felt anger flare in her chest. I had problems concentrating because I was being hurt at home and nobody would help me. But you did receive counseling services through the school district, correct? I saw a counselor a few times, but she kept asking me if I was having problems at home because I missed my grandmother, not because of what my stepfather was doing to me. And isn't it true that you've run away from home multiple times? I tried to leave 3 times before, but I always got caught and sent back. This time I made sure I got far enough away that they couldn't just drag me back. Don't you think your mother is worried about you? Amanda started to object, but Maria answered before she could speak. My mother stopped worrying about me when she started caring more about her pills than about keeping me safe. Judge Hernandez gestured for Mr. Morrison to return to his seat. Ms. Reeves, I'd like to hear from Mr. Crawford. Jack had been sitting quietly throughout Maria's testimony, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Now he approached the witness stand with the same calm dignity Maria had come to associate with everything he did. Mr. Crawford, the judge began, you understand that providing housing to a minor without proper legal custody is technically kidnapping? Yes, Your Honor, I do. But I also understand that sometimes you have to choose between what's technically legal and what's morally right. Tell me about your decision to let Ms. Santos stay on your ranch. She showed up in my barn looking like she hadn't eaten in days. She was exhausted, scared, and clearly running from something terrible. I've seen enough hurt animals in my life to recognize the signs in a human being. What made you think you were qualified to care for a traumatized teenager? Jack was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. I'm not sure anyone is qualified to undo the kind of damage that child has suffered, but I know how to provide safety, structure, and honest work. Sometimes that's enough to give someone a foundation to heal from. Describe Ms. Santos' behavior and development during her time at your ranch. When she first arrived, she was jumpy and suspicious. She barely spoke above a whisper, and she watched the road constantly, like she was expecting someone to come after her. She's still careful, but she's gained weight, her color is better, and she started laughing occasionally. What kind of work does she do? Everything. She helps with the horses, maintains fences, tends the garden. She's got a natural way with animals, and she's not afraid of hard work. In 2 months, she's learned skills that take most people years to develop. Have you had any problems with her behavior? No, Your Honor. She's respectful, responsible, and honest. She does her share of the work without being asked, and she's never given me any reason not to trust her. What are your long-term intentions regarding Ms. Santos? I'd like to provide her with a stable home until she's old enough to make her own decisions about her life. I'm willing to become a licensed foster parent if that's what it takes to make this arrangement legal. Do you understand the financial and emotional responsibilities involved in raising a teenager? I raised horses and cattle for 40 years, Your Honor. I understand that young creatures need consistency, patience, and someone who believes in their potential. The specific species doesn't change those basic requirements. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Judge Hernandez almost smiled at that answer. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. You may step down. Your Honor, Mr. Morrison said as he returned to the podium. While we sympathize with Ms. Santos' situation, we cannot recommend placing a minor in an unlicensed home, regardless of how well-intentioned Mr. Crawford may be. We have protocols for these situations. What placement are you recommending? We have a bed available at Sunrise Group Home in Phoenix. It's a licensed facility with trained staff and proper therapeutic resources. The same Phoenix where the original abuse allegedly occurred. Amanda asked. It's a different part of the city, and Ms. Santos would be in a controlled environment with professional supervision. Professional supervision that failed to protect her the first time, Amanda countered. Judge Hernandez raised her hand to stop the argument. I've heard enough for now. I'm going to recess for 30 minutes to review the evidence and consider my options. During the recess, Maria, Jack, and Amanda waited in a small conference room down the hall from the courtroom. Maria felt like she might throw up from nervousness. How do you think it went? She asked Amanda. Better than I hoped, honestly. Judge Hernandez seems to be taking the abuse allegations seriously, and she clearly sees that you're thriving in Jack's care. The challenge is that the law strongly favors license placements. What if she sends me to the group home? Then we appeal and keep fighting. But let's not borrow trouble. Judge Hernandez has a lot of discretion in emergency cases, and she seems to understand what's at stake here. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Hernandez looked tired but determined. This is one of the more challenging cases I've encountered in my 15 years on the family court bench, she began. On one hand, I have clear legal guidelines that favor license placements for minors in state custody. On the other hand, I have compelling evidence that those same guidelines failed to protect this child from serious harm. Maria held her breath. Ms. Santos, I want you to understand something. The adults in this courtroom all want what's best for you, even if we disagree about what that means. The question is not whether you've been hurt. The evidence makes that clear. The question is how we can best ensure your safety and well-being going forward. The judge shuffled through her papers before continuing. Mr. Morrison, your department's original investigation was inadequate. The records show clear warning signs that were ignored or dismissed. A child should not have to risk her life by running away to get the protection she deserves from a system designed to help her. Your Honor, Mr. Morrison began, but the judge held up her hand. I'm not finished. However, Ms. Reeves, emergency placement with an unlicensed caregiver sets a concerning precedent. I cannot ignore the legal requirements designed to protect children even when those same requirements have failed in the past. Maria felt tears starting to form. It sounded like the judge was going to send her to the group home after all. Therefore, I am issuing the following order. Ms. Santos will remain in the temporary custody of Mr. Crawford for a period of 90 days, during which time Mr. Crawford will complete the requirements for emergency foster parent licensing. The Department of Child Safety will conduct weekly visits to monitor the placement and will provide Ms. Santos with appropriate counseling services. Maria's heart leaped with relief and hope. Furthermore, Judge Hernandez continued, I am ordering a formal investigation into the department's handling of MS, Santos' original case, and I want a full report on my desk within 60 days detailing what went wrong and how similar failures will be prevented in the future. Mr. Morrison looked like he had swallowed something bitter, but he nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Santos, this is not a permanent solution. Much will depend on how Mr. Crawford navigates the licensing process and how you adjust to having regular contact with social services. But I believe you deserve a chance to continue healing in an environment where you feel safe. Thank you, Your Honor, Maria whispered. Don't thank me yet. The hard work is just beginning. Mr. Crawford, are you prepared to undergo the foster parent licensing process? Jack stood. Yes, Your Honor, whatever it takes. Ms. Reeves, I want you to work closely with your clients to ensure compliance with all court orders. Any violations of this arrangement, and Ms. Santos will be removed immediately. Understood, Your Honor. Very well. Court is adjourned. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Maria felt lighter than she had in months. The legal fight wasn't over, but for now, she could return to the ranch that had become her home. 90 days, she said to Jack as they reached the parking lot. That's not very long. It's long enough to prove that this arrangement works, Jack replied. And once I'm a licensed foster parent, they'll have a much harder time moving you somewhere else. What if you can't get licensed? What if they find some reason to disqualify you? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But, Maria, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this just to help you. You've brought life back to that ranch in ways I didn't even realize it was missing. This isn't charity. This is family. On the drive home, Amanda explained what the foster parent licensing process would involve. Background checks, home inspections, training classes, financial reviews, and interviews with everyone from neighbors to veterinarians who could speak to Jack's character and capability. It's intensive, she warned, but not impossible. The fact that Judge Hernandez gave us 90 days instead of the usual 30 suggests she wants this to work. What about school? Maria asked. I haven't been enrolled anywhere since I left Phoenix. That's next on our list, Amanda said. We'll need to get you registered for the fall semester. The court will want to see that you're making educational progress. As they turned into the driveway of the ranch, Maria felt the familiar sense of coming home that still surprised her with its intensity. The horses were grazing peacefully in the evening light, and the mountains beyond were painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. That night, as she helped Jack with the evening feeding, Maria reflected on how much had changed since that first desperate night in the hayloft. She was still the same girl who had run away from an impossible situation, but now she was also someone who belonged somewhere, someone who had work to do, and people who counted on her. Jack, she said as they finished filling the water troughs. Yeah. What made you decide to take such a big risk for someone you barely knew? Jack leaned against the fence rail, considering the question. You know, my wife Sarah always said that love isn't something you fall into, it's something you choose to build. When I saw you in that barn, exhausted and scared, but still trying to be brave, I guess I chose to start building. Even though you didn't know if I'd stay, even though you didn't know if it would work out. Especially then. The best things in life usually require a leap of faith. The trick is making sure you're leaping towards something worth the risk. As Maria looked around at the ranch that had become her sanctuary, she understood what he meant. Sometimes the most important decisions in life came down to choosing hope over fear, trust over suspicion, and the possibility of building something beautiful over the certainty of staying safe, but alone. The legal process would continue, and there would be more challenges ahead. But tonight, she was home, she was safe, and she was part of something larger than just her own survival. For a girl who had spent 2 years believing that no one would fight for her, that was more than enough to build a future on. The morning sun cast long shadows across the school parking lot as Jack pulled his truck into a space near the main entrance of Millerville High School. Maria sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to control the nervous energy that had been building since dawn. You sure about this? Jack asked gently, noticing her tension. No, Maria admitted, but I have to do it anyway. It was the first week of September, and after months of preparation and legal proceedings, Maria was finally ready to return to school. The past 10 weeks had been a whirlwind of activity. Jack completing his foster parent training, social worker visits, counseling sessions, and the constant paperwork that seemed to multiply every time they thought they were finished with it. The foster parent licensing process had been more intensive than either of them expected. Jack had to undergo background checks that went back decades, financial reviews that examined every aspect of his ranch operations, and home inspections that scrutinized everything from fire safety to the nutritional content of his refrigerator. But the most challenging part had been the interviews. Social workers, psychologists, and court-appointed advocates had all wanted to understand the dynamics of Maria's placement with Jack. They asked probing questions about boundaries, supervision, and the potential for inappropriate relationships between an older man and a teenage girl. I understand their concerns, Jack had told Amanda during one particularly frustrating session. But it's insulting to suggest that every adult who wants to help a child in need has ulterior motives. They're doing their job, Amanda replied. The system has seen enough abuse by people in positions of trust that they have to be careful. The fact that you understand and accept their scrutiny is actually a point in your favor. Maria had faced her own set of challenges during the licensing process. Weekly counseling sessions with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trauma specialist who worked with the family court system. At first, Maria had been reluctant to open.